Red warning lights flashed across the command bridge of the Earth defense ship Resolute. Admiral James Reed gripped the sides of his command chair as another blast rocked the ship. "Shields at 23%, shouted Lieutenant Kelly from her station. "We can't take much more of this, sir." Reed's face was grim. 3 years of war with the Drift Collective had pushed humanity to the edge. This battle over Colony 7 was supposed to be a minor skirmish, but somehow the aliens had known exactly where to hit them. "How many enemy ships remaining?" Reed asked. Thomas Wells, his tactical officer, looked up from his screen with dark eyes. 17, sir. And we're down to 4 ships. The math isn't good." Reed knew Wells was right. Their small defensive fleet was outmatched. In minutes, the colony below would be defenseless, and another human settlement would fall. "Sir," the communications officer's voice cracked with surprise, "I'm picking up a new signal. It's a ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel." "Drift reinforcements?" Reed asked, his heart sinking. "No, sir. The signal is human." Hope flickered in Reed's chest, but he crushed it down. "That's impossible. There are no other human fleets within 3 days' travel." A massive vessel suddenly appeared on their main view screen, emerging from a strange ripple in space that looked unlike any jump point Reed had ever seen. The ship was enormous, at least 3 times the size of the Resolute, with sleek lines and weapon systems unlike anything in the human fleet. But despite its differences, the design was unmistakably human. Before Reed could process what he was seeing, the mystery ship opened fire. Beams of blue-white energy lanced out from its sides, cutting through the drift ships with terrifying precision. 3 enemy vessels exploded immediately. The others tried to regroup, but the newcomer moved with impossible speed, its weapons slicing through alien shields as if they weren't there. "Are you seeing this?" Wells whispered, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Reed nodded silently. In 20 seconds, the mystery ship had destroyed 9 drift vessels. The remaining 8 were already turning to flee. "The drift ships are jumping out of the system," Kelly reported, disbelief in her voice. "They're retreating." The bridge fell silent as the crew watched the enemy signatures vanish from their screens. Only the massive unknown vessel remained, floating silently against the backdrop of stars. "Get me ship identification," Reed ordered, finding his voice. "I want to know who just saved our lives." The communications officer worked frantically at her station. "Sir, I don't understand. The ship is transmitting a valid Earth Defense Fleet identification code, but the ship class doesn't exist in our database." "What's the name?" Reed asked. "It's registering as EDF Paradox, sir." Reed had never heard of it. "Hail them." Moments later, the main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the mystery vessel. Reed's body went cold. Standing in the center of the screen, wearing an Earth Defense Fleet uniform with captain's insignia, was Thomas Wells. Reed turned to his right, where his tactical officer, also Thomas Wells, stood frozen, staring at his own face on the screen. "Admiral Reed," the Wells on the screen said with a small nod. "I understand this is confusing. Permission to come aboard and explain." Reed looked from the screen to his tactical officer and back again. "Granted," he said finally. 2 hours later, Reed sat in the Resolute's conference room, his mind still struggling to accept what he was hearing. Across from him sat the 2 identical men, Thomas Wells, his tactical officer of 3 years, and Captain Thomas Wells of the EDF Paradox. "You're claiming to be from the future?" Reed asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. "Not exactly," Captain Wells replied. "I'm from a potential future, a timeline that branched from this one through different technological choices." Dr. Anna Miller, the fleet's lead physicist, leaned forward. "Our scans of your ship defy explanation. The energy readings suggest technology far beyond our capabilities, yet the basic design principles are undeniably human. In my timeline, Captain Wells explained. Humanity discovered what we call omega phase technology, a way to manipulate quantum probabilities. It revolutionized our warfare capabilities against the drift. Then why come here? Reed asked. Why not stay in your timeline and use this advantage there? Captain Wells's face darkened. Because in my timeline, we still lost. The Omega technology had consequences we didn't foresee. The Paradox is the last human ship in my reality. We used the last of our Omega phase power to send it through a dimensional rift, hoping to find a timeline where humanity could be saved. The tactical officer, Wells, spoke up. If your timeline diverged from ours, what was the divergence point? What choice did your reality make that ours didn't? That's why I'm here, Captain Wells said. The choice hasn't been made yet in your timeline. It will come soon, within weeks. I'm here to ensure you make the right choice. Reed felt a chill. And what choice is that? Before Captain Wells could answer, the ship's alarm blared. Reed tapped his communicator. Report. Sir, came the urgent reply. The drift ships have returned with reinforcements. 30 vessels this time. Approaching fast. Reed stood. All hands to battle stations. Captain Wells, we'll continue this discussion later. For now, we need that ship of yours. Captain Wells nodded. The Paradox stands ready. As they headed toward the bridge, Dr. Miller pulled Reed aside. Admiral, our initial analysis of the Paradox shows something odd. The ship exists in a quantum state I can only describe as never built yet operational. It's as if the ship is simultaneously from our future and from a future that can never happen. What does that mean? Reed asked. I don't know, Miller admitted, but I'd be careful about what choices we make based on its appearance. There's a paradox here we don't understand yet. Reed watched as the two Thomas Wells walked ahead of them, their movements perfectly mirrored despite having lived different lives. Something was happening that went beyond normal understanding, and Reed had a sinking feeling that the fate of humanity would depend on unraveling this mystery before it was too late. As they reached the bridge, the view screen showed the approaching drift armada, and beside them, the impossible warship that shouldn't exist. Yet somehow it did. The battle was over in minutes. The drift collective ships, despite their numbers, stood no chance against the Paradox. Admiral Reed watched in stunned silence as the mysterious warship moved with impossible speed, its weapons cutting through enemy shields like they weren't even there. Their technology is. Lieutenant Kelly trailed off, unable to find the words. Beyond us, Reed finished for her. He turned to the two Thomas Wells standing side by side on his bridge. To the naked eye, they were completely identical. Same height, same face, same posture. Yet one commanded a ship that shouldn't exist. When the last enemy ship vanished from their screens, Reed ordered an immediate council meeting. He needed answers. The DNA tests are conclusive, Dr. Miller said, placing a tablet on the conference table. They are genetically identical. They are the same person. The room fell silent. Around the table sat Reed's top officers, along with Captain Wells from the Paradox and their own Thomas Wells. How is this possible? Asked Chief Engineer Robert Miller, Dr. Miller's husband. Even identical twins have slight genetic differences. Captain Wells leaned forward. Because we are the same person, just from different timelines. In my reality, I made different choices, lived a slightly different life, but I started from the same template. Tell us about this Omega technology, Reed said, and why your ship reads as never built on our scanners. Captain Wells nodded. In my timeline, we discovered how to manipulate quantum probability about 2 years ago. The drift war was going badly, just like in your reality. A scientist named Dr. Lisa Jones found a way to access other potential states of matter, things that could have existed but didn't. Dr. Miller's eyes widened. You're talking about harvesting technology from alternate timelines. Exactly. We could pull weapon designs, power systems, even entire ship components from realities where different scientific paths were taken. The Paradox was our masterpiece, a ship built from technologies that existed across dozens of potential timelines. That's why our scanners can't properly categorize it, Robert Miller said, understanding dawning. It's built from technologies that don't exist in our timeline, that were never invented here. But something went wrong, Reed guessed. Captain Wells's face darkened. Yes, the Omega technology gave us an edge against the drift. We started winning battles, but then we discovered the cost. Each time we pulled technology from another potential timeline, we destabilized the quantum fabric between realities. 3 months ago, that destabilization reached a critical point. What happened? Asked the other Wells, speaking for the first time. Reality began to collapse. Stars started disappearing. Entire planets phased out of existence. We realized too late that the Omega technology was unraveling the very fabric of our universe. Captain Wells's voice cracked with emotion. Earth was among the first major bodies to vanish. 8 billion lives, just gone. The room was completely silent. So you came here to warn us, Reed said finally. Yes. In 2 weeks, Dr. Jones in your timeline will have a breakthrough in her quantum research. She'll discover the principles that lead to Omega technology. I'm here to make sure you don't follow our path. Dr. Miller frowned. But if you're here to prevent the development of the technology that created your ship, isn't that a paradox? How can your ship exist if you prevent its creation? That's why it reads as never built yet operational on your sensors, Captain Wells explained. The paradox exists in a quantum superposition, simultaneously from a future that happened and a future that never will. Once your timeline firmly commits to a different path, my ship and I will likely cease to exist. Reed studied the captain carefully. You're on a suicide mission. To save an entire timeline. It's worth it. Captain Wells's face was resolute. One version of me will still exist. He nodded toward his counterpart. We need to understand your ship better, Robert Miller said. If we're facing more drift attacks, we could use that advantage, even temporarily. Agreed, Reed said. Chief Miller, assemble an engineering team. I want you to study the paradox and see what technologies we might safely adapt without risking this reality collapse. I'll help, Captain Wells offered. Hours later, Robert Miller stood in the massive engine room of the paradox, surrounded by technology he could barely comprehend. Captain Wells guided him and his team through the systems, explaining what he could. This is the heart of it, Captain Wells said, pointing to a pulsing blue core. The Omega phase reactor. It doesn't just power the ship, it keeps it anchored across potential realities. Miller shook his head in wonder. The power readings are off the charts. How does it not tear itself apart? Quantum stabilizers here, here, and here. Wells pointed to 3 pillars surrounding the core. They balanced the probability fields. As they spoke, a young engineer called out from a nearby console. Sir, I found something interesting. Some of these systems seem compatible with our current technology, like they were designed to interface with our ships. Captain Wells nodded slowly. They would be. The paradox was built to integrate with the fleet we had before the collapse began. Miller approached the console and examined the readings. He's right. We could adapt some of these weapon systems to our ships without needing the Omega technology itself. Be careful what you take, Captain Wells warned. Even small changes to your technological path could lead you down our road. As they continued their work, alarm sirens suddenly blared throughout the ship. Miller grabbed a nearby communication panel. Miller to bridge. What's happening? Reed's voice came through, tense and urgent. Long-range sensors have detected a massive drift fleet entering the system, much bigger than anything we've seen before. They'll be here in less than 6 hours. They've adapted, Captain Wells said grimly. In my timeline, this is when they launch their major counteroffensive. They study our technology and find ways to counter it. Miller looked at the Omega core, its blue light pulsing steadily. We need to get these adaptations to our fleet now. It's our only chance. Captain Wells nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. Just remember, every step you take toward my timeline puts you at risk of my fate. As they rushed to prepare for the coming battle, neither man noticed a subtle change in the Omega Core's pulsing rhythm, or the way reality seemed to shimmer slightly around the edges of the massive ship that both did and did not exist. 5 hours passed in a blur of activity. Earth ships gathered around Colony 7 as engineers worked frantically to install modified weapons from the Paradox. Admiral Reed watched from the bridge of the Resolute as his small fleet of 12 ships prepared for battle against a force 5 times their size. "Status report," Reed called out. Lieutenant Kelly responded immediately. "All ships report weapons upgrades at 90% completion. The Drift fleet will arrive in 48 minutes. Reed nodded and turned to the 2 Thomas Wells, who stood side by side studying a holographic battle map. It was unsettling how they moved in sync, often reaching for the same controls at the exact same moment. They had been working on battle plans for hours, finishing each other's sentences as if sharing one mind. "Gentlemen," Reed said, "I need options." The Wells from his timeline, now wearing a small red band on his wrist to help people tell them apart, pointed to a cluster of stars on the map. "The Drift will approach from this vector. Their usual tactic is to spread into 3 attack groups." Captain Wells continued without pause. "But with their new adaptations, they'll likely use a 5th-dimensional approach, hitting us from multiple time fronts at once." "Time fronts?" Reed asked. "Micro jumps in time," Captain Wells explained, "forward and backward by milliseconds, making their ships nearly impossible to target because they're slightly out of phase with our timeline." "How do we counter that?" Both Wells responded in perfect unison. "Quantum-locked targeting sensors." They glanced at each other, startled by their synchronization. Reed noticed that this had been happening more and more over the past hours, the 2 men thinking and acting as one. Dr. Anna Miller entered the bridge, her face showing concern. "Admiral, may I speak with you privately?" Reed followed her to a quiet corner of the bridge. "What is it, Doctor?" "It's the Wellses. Their brain scans are changing." She showed him a tablet with 2 brain scan images. "Their neural patterns are synchronizing at an accelerating rate. It's as if their minds are merging across timelines." Reed looked over at the 2 identical men, now speaking in rapid, half-finished sentences that somehow made complete sense to each other. "Is it dangerous?" "I don't know. But if it continues, we may effectively have one person existing in 2 bodies. And I'm concerned about what happens when the paradox eventually disappears. What will that do to our wells?" Before Reed could respond, Chief Robert Miller's voice came through the comm system. "Engineering to bridge. Admiral, you need to see this." In the engineering lab, Robert Miller stood before a complex set of equipment connected to a small blue crystal, a fragment from the Paradox's Omega core that Captain Wells had reluctantly allowed them to study. "We've been analyzing how the Omega technology interfaces with standard systems," Miller explained as Reed entered. "And we've discovered something troubling." He activated a screen showing complex equations and energy patterns. "The Omega technology isn't just compatible with our systems, it's perfectly designed to integrate with them. Too perfectly." "What are you saying?" Reed asked. "I'm saying that the Paradox wasn't built to work with any generic Earth technology. It was specifically designed to interface with our systems, our exact systems, down to the component level." Dr. Miller, who had followed Reed, stepped forward with wide eyes. "That would mean—" "The Paradox wasn't built in some random alternate timeline," Chief Miller finished. "It was built in a potential future of this specific timeline." Reed felt a chill run through him. "So when Captain Wells says he's here to prevent us from developing Omega technology, he's actually preventing the future that created his ship. And him," Dr. Miller said. "The very future he came from." "But that creates a paradox," Reed said. "If we don't develop the technology, his ship can't exist to come back and warn us. That's why the ship exists in that strange quantum state," Dr. Miller replied. "It's caught in a temporal loop, both existing and not existing simultaneously. A voice spoke from the doorway. "There's more to it than that." They turned to see both Welses standing there. It was impossible to tell which one had spoken. "The paradox wasn't sent back just to warn you," said the one with the red band. "It was sent back to ensure you make the right choice at the coming quantum decision point." Captain Wells nodded. "A moment when multiple timelines converge and then branch based on a single critical choice." "What choice?" Reed demanded. The two Welses exchanged looks. Then Captain Wells said, "In 2 days, Dr. Lisa Jones will approach you with a theoretical breakthrough in quantum physics. She'll call it cross-dimensional energy harvesting. What you decide then will determine everything." The ship's alert system suddenly blared. Kelly's voice came over the comm. "All hands to battle stations. Drift Fleet has arrived ahead of schedule. They're already engaging our outer defense line." The battle began with a fury unlike anything Reed had ever seen. The drift ships moved strangely, seeming to flicker in and out of normal space as they attacked. "They're using time-shift technology," Captain Wells called out from his position at a tactical station. "Just as I feared." The Paradox moved to engage, its advanced weapons tearing through the enemy ships that couldn't match its technology. The upgraded Earth fleet followed, their new weapons proving effective against the drift defenses. But something was wrong. As the battle progressed, Reed noticed the Paradox occasionally flickering, becoming transparent for split seconds before solidifying again. "The ship is destabilizing," Dr. Miller reported, checking sensor readings. "Its quantum state is fluctuating. I think our current actions are affecting its timeline." On the main view screen, a drift cruiser exploded as the Paradox scored another direct hit. But immediately after, the massive warship flickered violently, almost disappearing entirely before reappearing. "We're changing the future," Reed realized. "Every decision we make is altering the probability of the timeline that created the Paradox." The two Wells men suddenly clutched their heads in pain, dropping to their knees. As officers rushed to help them, Captain Wells looked up at Reed with fear in his eyes. "It's happening," he gasped. "The timelines are shifting. You need to know the truth before it's too late." "What truth?" Reed demanded. "The Paradox wasn't sent back to save humanity," Captain Wells said, his voice strained. "It was sent back to ensure humanity develops Omega technology, to make its own creation inevitable." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Around them, the battle raged on, but Reed could only stare at the man from a future that might never be, a future that was fighting to ensure its own existence. And the cost of that existence, Reed now realized, might be the true future of humanity itself. "What do you mean?" Admiral Reed demanded, staring at Captain Wells, who was still on his knees, face twisted in pain. Despite his suffering, Captain Wells managed to speak. "The Omega technology saved us from the drift. But it doomed us in the end. When reality began to collapse, our scientists discovered something terrible. It wasn't just random breakdown. The collapse had a pattern." The Resolute shook as enemy fire struck its shields. Around them, the battle continued, but on the bridge, all attention was on the man from a future that was fighting to exist. "The collapse was centered on Earth," Captain Wells continued, "because Earth was where the time loop began. The Paradox was designed to travel back and ensure its own creation, completing a stable time loop." The Wells with the red band, equally pained, spoke next. "But stable time loops are impossible in quantum reality. The energy cost grows with each cycle, until it tears reality apart," Dr. Miller whispered, understanding dawning on her face. Captain Wells nodded weakly. "By the 5th cycle, our Earth was gone. By the 7th, our solar system. This ship was sent back for the 8th time, when only a handful of human colonies remained." Reed's tactical officer shouted from his station. "Sir, multiple drift ships breaking through our western flank." "Hold the line," Reed ordered, then turned back to the Wellses. If what you're saying is true, then why try to complete the loop again? Why not break it? The scientists of my time believed they could stabilize the loop, Captain Wells said. They thought if we could ensure the paradox was built in exactly the right way this time, the cycle would hold. They sent me back with specific instructions. Make sure Dr. Jones makes her discovery. Guide the development of Omega technology along a precise path. His counterpart from this timeline shook his head. But it won't work. The math is wrong. I can see it now. We can see it. How can you know that? Reed asked. Dr. Miller stepped forward. Because their minds are merging across timelines. Our Wells is gaining the memories and knowledge of Captain Wells. On the main view screen, the massive form of the paradox flickered again, more violently this time. For nearly 3 seconds, it disappeared completely before reappearing. We're running out of time, Dr. Miller warned. The decision point is approaching. If we choose to develop Omega technology, the paradox will stabilize and become permanent in our timeline. If we reject it, the loop breaks, finished Captain Wells. And my ship, and I, will cease to exist. Reed faced an impossible choice. Follow the path that might save them from the drift, but would eventually lead to the collapse of reality itself, or reject their most powerful weapon in the middle of a desperate battle. Sir, Lieutenant Kelly called out. The drift are pulling back and regrouping. They're forming a new attack pattern. The main screen showed the drift fleet reorganizing. At the center of their formation, a massive ship emerged from faster-than-light travel, at least twice the size of even the paradox. The Harbinger, Captain Wells whispered, his face pale. Their command ship. In my timeline, they only deployed it once, right before we developed the first Omega weapons. Reed turned to his tactical officer. Analysis. Energy readings off the charts, sir. Whatever that thing is, it's more powerful than anything we've faced. Captain Wells struggled to his feet. Admiral, you need to make a choice now. Let me complete my mission. Let the paradox guide you to develop Omega technology. It's the only way to defeat the Harbinger and doom humanity to a collapsing reality. Reed asked. We can fix the loop this time, Captain Wells insisted, though doubt showed in his eyes. The scientists believed it was possible. Dr. Miller stepped forward. Admiral, I've been analyzing the quantum state of the paradox. There's something else happening. Something neither Wells is telling us. Both Welleses tensed visibly. What is it, Doctor? Reed asked. The timeline that created the paradox doesn't just end with humanity's extinction, Dr. Miller said. My calculation suggested ends with the extinction of all life in our galaxy. The collapse spreads beyond just our reality. Reed looked at Captain Wells. Is this true? For a moment, Captain Wells said nothing. Then slowly, painfully, he nodded. The last reports before I left, other intelligent species were disappearing. Entire star systems going dark. It was spreading faster than anyone predicted. A horrified silence fell over the bridge. Finally, Reed spoke. Then the choice is clear. We can't create a weapon that will eventually destroy everything. But without it, the drift will destroy humanity anyway, Captain Wells argued desperately. At least with Omega technology, we get more time. The ship with the red band had been silent, his eyes closed as if concentrating deeply. Now he opened them. There's another way. Everyone turned to him. I can see his memories now, his knowledge, Wells explained, pointing to his counterpart. And I can see the flaws in the Omega design. What if we don't fully develop Omega technology, but we don't fully reject it either? What do you mean? Reed asked. A third path, Wells said. We take elements of the Omega system, the parts that don't manipulate timeline probability, and combine them with our existing technology. Create something new. Captain Wells shook his head. That wasn't the plan. The loop needs to be broken, Wells interrupted, but carefully, in a way that still gives us a fighting chance against the drift. The paradox flickered again on the screen, disappearing for nearly 10 seconds this time before reappearing, its form now translucent and unstable. The Harbinger is powering up its main weapon, Kelly shouted, energy levels spiking. We're out of time, Reed said. He looked between the two identical men, one fighting to preserve a doomed future, the other proposing a desperate gamble for a new path. Reed made his decision. Chief Miller, he called over the comm. Begin implementing Wells's hybrid technology approach immediately. Dr. Miller, help them calculate the quantum effects. Admiral, Captain Wells protested. You're making a mistake. No, Reed said firmly. I'm choosing a third option. We won't accept extinction from either the drift or a collapsing reality. As orders were shouted and the crew rushed to implement the new plan, Reed watched the main screen where the paradox continued to flicker between existence and non-existence, a warship caught between timelines, representing a future that might never come to pass. And beyond it, the massive drift Harbinger moved into firing position, its weapon systems glowing with power that could end humanity once and for all. The quantum decision point had arrived. The Harbinger is charging its main weapon. Lieutenant Kelly's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. Impact in 40 seconds. Admiral Reed watched the massive drift command ship on the main screen. Its center was glowing with building energy that made the sensors flash warning signals. All ships, evasive pattern Delta, Reed ordered. Get behind Colony 7's moon. As the Earth fleet scrambled to move, Chief Miller's voice came through the comm system. Admiral, we've completed the first phase of modifications. We can't rebuild everything, but we've managed to implement the hybrid approach to our main weapons array. Will it be enough? Reed asked. Unknown, sir, but it's the best we can do. On the bridge, both Thomas Wells stood side by side, their faces showing the same expression of deep concentration. Over the past minutes, they had grown even more synchronized, sometimes speaking in perfect unison without realizing it. The paradox is our key, said the Wells with the red band. Its omega core can be modified to create a quantum cascade effect. Captain Wells nodded. A one-time burst of energy that will affect all drift ships while avoiding the continuous timeline manipulation that causes the collapse. Can you do it? Reed asked. The two men looked at each other, then spoke in perfect unison. Yes, but there's a cost. Captain Wells continued alone. The paradox will have to channel all energy from its omega core. Once that happens, the timeline shift will be irreversible. The ship, and I, will fade from existence as this timeline fully commits to its new path. Reed held his gaze. You're willing to do this, to erase yourself, to break a loop that ends with galactic extinction. Captain Wells gave a sad smile. It's the only logical choice. A blinding beam of energy suddenly shot from the Harbinger, striking the moon that the Earth fleet was using for cover. The entire surface of the small moon glowed red-hot for a moment before large cracks spread across its face. The moon's breaking apart, Kelly shouted. Structural integrity failing. We're out of time, Reed said. Do it now. The two Wells men nodded and rushed to separate stations. I need to return to the paradox, Captain Wells said. I have to initiate the cascade from inside the Omega Core chamber. I'll coordinate from here, his counterpart replied. As Captain Wells headed for the transport room, Dr. Miller caught up with him in the corridor. The calculations showed you'll have about 2 minutes after initiating the cascade before the timeline shift completes. Not much time to say goodbye, Captain Wells said with a grim smile. There's something else, Dr. Miller added quietly. Once you're gone, our Wells may experience significant neural shock. The merging of your minds has progressed too far for a clean separation. Captain Wells stopped walking. You mean he might die too? It's possible. He was silent for a moment, then continued toward the transport room. He knows the risk. We both do. On the paradox, Captain Wells ran through the eerily empty corridors. The ship had always operated with a minimal crew, but now it felt like a ghost ship. Each time it flickered between existence and non-existence, more systems failed. He reached the Omega core chamber and began the complex sequence to modify its output. As he worked, he opened a communication channel to the Resolute. "Admiral, I'm beginning the modification sequence. The Paradox will draw all drift ships toward it with a specialized tractor field, then release the modified Omega Pulse." "Understood," Reed's voice replied. "Our fleet is moving to safe distance." On his screen, Captain Wells could see the Harbinger charging for another blast. The massive weapon would be ready to fire in less than a minute. "The hybrid technology is online," came the voice of his counterpart from the Resolute. "All Earth ships are locked in and synchronized." Captain Wells took a deep breath as he placed his hands on the final controls. "Admiral, it's been an honor serving with you, in any timeline." "The honor is ours, Captain," Reed replied solemnly. The Omega core pulsed with brilliant blue light as Captain Wells activated the sequence. The entire ship shuddered, systems blaring warnings as power was redirected. "Tractor field active," he reported. "All drift ships being pulled toward our position." On the main screen, he could see the drift fleet struggling against the invisible force that was dragging them toward the Paradox. Even the massive Harbinger couldn't resist, its weapons firing wildly as it was pulled off course. 20 seconds to pulse activation," Captain Wells announced. The ship was flickering more rapidly now, sometimes disappearing for several seconds at a time. In his mind, he felt a strange doubling effect, as if he could see through his counterpart's eyes on the Resolute bridge. The neural connection between them was growing stronger even as the timeline that created him was fading. 10 seconds, he said, his voice echoing oddly as his counterpart spoke the same words simultaneously on the Resolute. The Paradox gave a violent lurch, systems failing across the board. The Harbinger had managed to fire its weapon, striking the great ship at an angle. Alarms blared as the Omega core fluctuated dangerously. "Core destabilizing," Captain Wells shouted. "The pulse sequence is compromised." On the Resolute, his counterpart suddenly stiffened. "I can fix it, through our connection. But I'll need to deepen the neural link." Dr. Miller grabbed his arm. "If you do that when the ship vanishes." "I know," Wells said grimly, "but there's no other way." Wells closed his eyes, concentrating on the mental connection with his counterpart. On the Paradox, Captain Wells felt the presence in his mind grow stronger, guiding his hands as they worked frantically to stabilize the core. 5 seconds to pulse, both men said together. The drift fleet was now clustered around the Paradox, trapped in its tractor field. The Harbinger loomed largest of all, its weapons still firing desperately. 3, 2, 1. The Omega core erupted with blinding light. A wave of blue-white energy expanded outward from the Paradox, enveloping the drift fleet. Where it touched their ships, strange effects rippled across their hulls. Weapon systems flickered and died, engines failed, and shield generators collapsed. On the Resolute's bridge, Wells collapsed to the floor. Dr. Miller rushed to his side as Reed watched the main screen in awe. The drift ships hung dead in space, completely powerless. The massive Harbinger drifted without lights or signs of life, and at the center of it all, the Paradox was changing. Its form grew transparent, sections of it seeming to disappear and reappear in different configurations. "What's happening?" Reed asked. Dr. Miller looked up from scanning Wells's unconscious form. "The timeline is shifting. The Paradox is resolving itself." On the screen, the great warship flickered one final time, and then transformed. Instead of disappearing completely, it shifted into a new form. Still recognizably the same vessel, but different, sleeker in some ways, less advanced in others. The blue glow of its Omega core was gone, replaced by a more conventional power signature. "Impossible," Dr. Miller whispered. "It's rewriting itself into something that could exist in our new timeline." On the floor, Wells groaned and opened his eyes. "Not impossible," he said weakly, "just improbable. We didn't break the loop. We rewrote it. The paradox still exists, but as a ship that could be built with our hybrid technology. Reed stared at the transformed vessel. And Captain Wells. Wells shook his head sadly. Gone. His timeline no longer exists, so neither does he. But some of his knowledge remains here. He tapped his temple. Sir, Kelly called out, we're receiving a transmission from the paradox. From the ship. Put it on screen, Reed ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the transformed vessel. It was empty of crew, but the computer systems were active. Greetings, Admiral Reed, came a synthesized voice. This is Automated System P-89 of the Earth Defense Vessel Divergence. I have integrated the command protocols from the quantum timeline shift. This vessel is now configured according to the new technological path and awaits your commands. Reed looked at Wells, who managed a small smile. Divergence, he repeated, an appropriate name for a ship born from a path not taken. The drift fleet remains disabled, the ship's AI continued. Analysis suggests their systems will require approximately 72 hours to recover from the quantum pulse effect. Reed straightened his uniform. More than enough time to get reinforcements here. He turned to his crew. Send word to Earth Command. The tide has turned. As the crew celebrated around him, Reed gazed at the transformed ship on the screen. A warship that both was and wasn't the paradox. A vessel born from a timeline now erased yet still somehow present. The warship that was never built, he murmured. Yet it fought our greatest battle. Wells finished beside him. Outside the viewport, the disabled drift fleet drifted harmlessly in space, while the newly christened Divergence held position, a symbol of humanity's choice to forge its own path through the quantum possibilities of time. The loop was broken. The future was unwritten. And somewhere, in a timeline that now would never exist, Captain Thomas Wells faded into the quantum possibilities of what might have been, his sacrifice ensuring that humanity would survive to see not just tomorrow, but all the days that followed.